وقل رب زدني علما.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أهلا وسهلا ومرحبا بكم جميعا. Welcome all of you to today's class. We're going to be talking about, inshallah, we're going to introduce the books of Tafsir. So this is our third class in this particular series in which we introduce the Tafsir course, inshallah ta'ala. And we've introduced so far the Quranic Sciences. And the session before this, we've introduced the Usul al-Tafsir, or foundations of Tafsir. And today we're going to talk about the actual books of Tafsir and how they are categorized, and how you as a beginner can decide which book is best for you, inshallah ta'ala. Bismillah. Introduction to the books of Tafsir. The first point we're going to cover, inshallah ta'ala, are the characteristics of the books of Tafsir. All right, and this is studied, or this part of a science called Manahij al-Mufassirin, or the methodologies of the Mufassirun, or the people that do Tafsir. And it's a science in which three things are studied when it comes to the books of Tafsir, or those that do Tafsir. And the first thing that makes a Tafsir book unique, if you like, is the manhaj, or the methodology that is followed by the author. Okay? So what do you mean by methodology? The methodology is kind of like the what. Okay? For example, what are his sources, generally speaking? Okay, so that's part of the methodology of the author of Tafsir. What sources does he return back to? And or if it is that he returns back to different sources, which sources does he focus on? And an example that I can give is, for example, when it comes to Tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran, when it comes to making Tafsir of the Quran by way of the Quran, then you have a famous book called 𝐓𝐚𝐼𝐳 by 𝐁𝐨𝐨𝐤𝐬, one of the contemporary scholars. And this book, it focuses on doing Tafsir of the Quran by way of the Quran. So that's his main focus. So that's part of the manhaj of this Mufassir. Then you'll find other books who mainly focus on doing Tafsir al-Quran bis-Sunnah. Doesn't mean they don't do the rest, but this is what they focus on the most. So you're going to find a lot of ahadith and a lot of narrations from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in those kind of books, such as Tafsir ibn Kathir, as an example. Then you have other books of Tafsir which really focus on the Tafsir al-Quran bi aqwal al-Salaf, doing Tafsir of the Quran by way of the statements of the Salaf. And that's the core of that Tafsir. And an example that I can give is Tafsir al-Tabari. Tafsir al-Tabari is full of narrations from the Salaf, and so on and so forth. So this is what's meant by the methodology when it comes to the different sources that Mufassir focuses on. And one particular book I'd like to point out as well is a book called Mawsu'at al-Tafsir al-Ma'thur, which is an encyclopedia, sort of, where they have gathered all of the narrations, all of the authentic narrations related to Tafsir from the books of Tafsir. You name it, all of the books of Tafsir, they put it together. From the books of Tafsir and the books of Ahadith, it's an invaluable resource, really, in that regard. Another example of a manhaj of a Mufassir is, what principles does he abide by? Okay, so everyone, before they author, any author that authors in Tafsir, there are certain principles that he abides by. What are they? Likewise, what is the scope of his Tafsir? In other words, what level of detail will he cover? How deep will he go? That's also part of the methodology of the Mufassir. And all of these things, they can be discovered by either reading the introduction to that Tafsir, because you'll find that most of the time the Mufassir, he will mention this in his introduction. He will say, my Tafsir book is from these sources, and these are my principles, and this is what I'm going to focus on. These sort of things, normally the Mufassir mentions it in his introduction. And some of the things as well that are part of his methodology, he might not mention explicitly in the introduction, but that's where this science of manhaj al-mufassirin comes in, whereby people that are specialized in this field, they analyze the tafsir and they try to figure out exactly what manhaj this mufassir has implemented, or which methodology, or what his methodology was. So this particular science is quite important in that regard, if you want to know more about the books of tafsir. Another thing that's also studied when it comes to manhaj al-mufassirin, what's called al-ittijah, which is kind of like the inclination or the direction that the mufassir is going in, right? And you can understand this as the why, okay? Why he decided to write the tafsir, what kind of like pushed him to write the tafsir, or the sort of things that he is personally inclined towards. Yes. Some of the examples that I can give is in terms of personal beliefs. For example, you'll find that the mufassirun, they differ when it comes to their inclinations towards different aqeedas. So not all of them are upon the Salafi aqeedah or methodology. So you'll find those tafsirs that are written by a mufassir who's upon the Salafi aqeedah, and you'll find that this has an impact obviously on his tafsir. Or sometimes you'll find that the mufassir has an Ash'ari aqeedah, or sometimes he might have a Mu'tazili aqeedah, or any other misguided aqeedah. This is what's called the ittijah. Or in terms of science, so you'll find that this particular mufassir, he's inclined towards a specific science from the sciences of Islam. So it might be that he is he specifies in aqeedah, for example, right? And that's a strong point. So you're going to find that this has an effect on his tafsir. Or it might be that he's a faqih, and his if you like, background is in fiqh. So you're going to find that his book of tafsir is going to have this inclination of his towards fiqh is going to have an effect on his tafsir. Or it might be that he's inclined towards the language, the Arabic language. He might be a linguist. Or it might be that he is a mu'arrikh, someone who's got a background in history, Islamic history. Okay, all these things, all these inclinations, they normally have a indirect impact on the manhaj, on the methodology. So even though the mufassir himself might not realize it, or he might not explicitly mention it, you'll find that when we look at his background and his aqeedah and what he was focusing on, we'll find that that particular background, personal background, has an impact on his methodology. Okay, and this is mainly governed by the mufassir's personal or academic background, as we've mentioned, when it comes to the aqeedah. Or sometimes also impacted by or governed by the mufassir's objective. Why did he write the tafsir? He might have a specific reason why he wrote the tafsir. Maybe he wrote the tafsir in order to guide the people. Maybe he wrote the tafsir in order to motivate people. And maybe he wrote the tafsir in order to prove a specific point, right? So the objective as well is one of the things that have an effect on the ittijah. Or sometimes it's also governed by the target audience. Who is he writing it for? If he's writing it for linguists or people that are strong in the language, then obviously his tafsir is going to be different from someone who's writing a tafsir for the general folk. Okay, so all these things have to do with ittijah, and the scholars or the people in this field, they go into it and they analyze it, and they keep this in mind when they're studying the tafsir. And the final thing, which also is one of the characteristics of the books of tafsir, is the method or the tariqah. And this is like the how, okay? Such as, for example, does he make tafsir on a word by word or ayah by ayah basis? So does he do it word by word, or does he address the whole ayah in one go? Or does he present all the narrations first and then comment on it, or vice versa? In other words, does he bring all the narrations and then he gives his ijtihad? Or does he mention his ijtihad or his principle and then he references the different narrations to prove his point? Likewise, does he follow the order of the surahs as they are in the mushaf, or does he go by way of the order of revelation or any other order? So again, these are technicalities, mainly technical things, right? This is also something that is studied. Likewise, it's important to know that there are books out there that are relevant to tafsir, but they're not actually books of tafsir. But they are needed for tafsir, especially for the person who is doing tafsir. He needs to return back to these books, okay, even though they're not specifically written on tafsir. So in essence, they're not really books of tafsir, but they're important resources. And some of the examples that I can give is Kutub Asbab an-Nuzul, those books that are written about when the ayat were revealed, or the context within the context in which the ayat were revealed. So it's kind of like a historical study of this ayah, when it was revealed, for what reason it was revealed. This has specific books on it called Asbab al-Nuzul. These books, even though they're not termed as books of tafsir, a mufassir needs to return back to these kind of books. Likewise, the books which are called i'rab al-Quran, the books that go into a very detailed grammatical analysis of the Quran, or linguistical analysis of the Quran. Again, they're not specifically books of tafsir, but they're needed in tafsir. Or kutub al-waqf al-ibtida, books that study where one should stop when he's reading the Quran. So when you're reading the Quran obviously, as you know, it doesn't have punctuation marks, right? The ones that we are used to anyway. But there are books written that mention where you should stop, and this is related to tafsir. Why? Because where you stop has an effect on the meaning. Okay, I can't give examples right now because of the time restrictions, but there are situations whereby if you stop in a certain place, to give a quick example, Allah says in the Quran, فَوَيْلُ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. No, let's say Allah mentions in the Quran, يَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَقْرَبُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَأَنْتُمْ سُكَارَى. O you who believe, do not approach the prayer whilst you are in a state of intoxication. Now, you can't stop in the middle of this portion. You can't read the Quran and say, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَقْرَبُوا الصَّلَاةَ. You can't stop there. Waqf there is not permitted. It's not permissible. Why? Because then the meaning is going to be, oh, you who believe, do not approach the prayer. And then you stop there. And that's not the meaning of the ayah. The ayah says, don't approach the prayer whilst you're in a state of intoxication. So you have to complete it up to there. So there are books that outline where you can stop, where you can't stop. So those books, even though they're not explicitly books of tafsir, the person doing tafsir, he needs to return back to those books so that he knows up to where, or up to which place within the ayah the meaning is complete. Okay? It gives you a lot of different insights. And sometimes in the Quran, depending on where you stop, you can read one ayah, stop in different places, and it's going to have two different meanings, which is from the miracle or from the miraculous nature of the Quran, that one ayah can have so many different meanings depending on where you stop. طيب. One important question. Are the Quran translations, yes, considered to be books of tafsir? Now that's a question that I want to pose on WooClap. Inshallah, I want you to answer that question. Okay, you'll find the question on WooClap. So, are the Quran translations considered to be books of tafsir? Okay, I've got 3 answers so far. Okay, let's see some of the answers. Okay, so for the most part, people are saying no. Some people are saying yes. Yes, some are, and some aren't. So I've got yes, I've got no. Okay. I've got yes, because it helps clarify the meaning of the Quran. No, because they are translations, not clarifications of the Quran. Okay. Okay, no, because it caters to an audience that doesn't speak Arabic. Yeah, so you can like those answers. Let's see if anyone that believes any of those answers are right or wrong. Just like it, and then we'll see, inshallah, what most of you think. We can use tafsir to formulate translation. Okay. Now, this is a very important question. This is an extremely important question. And I remember that we had actually addressed this in last lesson, or we gave an example, right? So I can see that most of you went for no. The reason being because they are translations, not clarification of the Quran. Now, the reality is that there is no such thing called translation of the Quran. That doesn't exist. Instead, what we have is translation of the meanings of the Quran. Okay? It's a very important thing to know. The Quran you can't translate the Quran literally, okay, from Arabic to another language, word by word. You can't do that the way that you could with anything else, right? The only thing that can be done is that you translate the meaning of it, right? Because the English language is not up to par with the Arabic language, right? So in order to bring over the meaning that an Arab would understand, yes, you are going to have to translate it by translating that meaning, not by translating it word by word, because that wouldn't give the meaning, okay? And we gave many examples last lesson where we talked about how some people translated, for example, احشروا الذين ظلموا وأزواجهم, that gathered those that have done wrong, and some people said their wives, أزواجهم. And أزواج is the plural of زوج, wives, okay? But that's only one of the meanings that word has linguistically. زوج also means a kind or partner or something that is similar to something else. All right. So here you'll find that this person who went on or decided to translate the Quran, he translated the Quran according to what he understood. He translated the Quran, he read the Quran in Arabic, he understood something, yes, and that understanding is either authentic or inauthentic, is either right or wrong, yes, and then he went about and he put that, what he understood from the Arabic, he put that in English. So he basically made tafsir of the Quran, because now he's trying to explain the meaning of the Quran according to his understanding. Okay, so this is really important. The books, those books that translate the Quran, or any translation of the Quran, in essence is a tafsir of the Quran. So everything that applies to the foundations of tafsir need to apply to these kind of books. Allahumma, there's one exception to that, okay, which is those books or those translations of the meanings of the Quran whereby the author basically he returns back to the books of tafsir and he just transmits what he finds in the books of tafsir and he translates those. So that's in essence a translation of the books of tafsir, not a translation of the Quran. So they go to Ibn Kathir or Bin Sa'di or these kind of books, and they take the correct meaning from these authentic books, and then they put that in a summarized way, in an easy way to understand, or they even translate it directly. It doesn't matter, right? That kind of book, or an author, someone who wants to write that kind of book on tafsir, he doesn't need to be a mufassir that is qualified, because he's just transmitting or translating what the mufassirun came to, right? Again, a really important concept there, brothers and sisters, right? Don't just go out there and read any book that translates the Quran and thinking that they're delivering the meaning of the Quran to you. They're delivering their understanding. So if it is that that person who has translated that Quran is not someone who is qualified to do tafsir, and he's not transmitting from the books of tafsir, yes, or he's not someone who's trustworthy, then in essence, you're putting yourself in great danger, because you are consuming what you think is the meaning of the Quran, but in reality, it is what this person understood from the Quran. Okay, a very important question. Please pay attention to that. Okay. طيب. Going back to what we mentioned. So that's with regards to the science of Manahij al-Mufassirin, the methodology of the books of tafsir, or those mufassirun that make tafsir of the Quran. We also have what we call, there are 4 different formats of doing tafsir. I remember I've mentioned this before, especially before the tafsir class that I did in Ramadan. So I suppose I'll ask it on WooClap as well. So what are the 4 different formats of doing tafsir? So the format, what I mean by format is that, you know, the way the tafsir is kind of like, or different types of tafsir, right? There are 4 main types or formats in which the scholars, they make tafsir. Do you know any of them? Let's see even if you know it. Books, video. No, I don't mean the media. I don't mean the medium, right? Okay, it doesn't matter. This question might be a bit too difficult. Okay, no problem. All right, yeah, this is a difficult question. This is basically going by, assuming some of you remember from Ramadan, but no problem. Okay, so the 4 different formats of tafsir are, number 1, what we call tafsir al-ijmali. which is when somebody or when a mufassir makes tafsir of the Quran, what we call a general tafsir. So he explains the general meaning, okay? The general meaning of the ayah. He doesn't translate it word by word. He looks at the ayah, gives you a general meaning, such as tafsir al-Imam al-Sa'di, for example. Another format is a tafsir al-Tahlili, okay, which is when they do tafsir in a very detailed manner, word by word. So they take it word by word. This word, what does it mean? This word, what does it mean? And they make tafsir in a very detailed, analytical manner. Another format of tafsir is what we call a tafsir al-Muqaran, whereby the mufassir, he gathers all the different sayings from the people of tafsir, and then he compares between their statements, and he mentions which statements are authentic and which ones are not. So he's kind of like it's a comparative tafsir. And then finally, we have what we call a tafsir al-mawdu'i, which is making tafsir of the Quran on a topic by topic basis, a thematic tafsir, right? Whereby you focus on a specific topic. Let's say, for example, Tawheed in the Quran. So you mention all of the ayat that have mentioned Tawheed and all the subtopics, and you kind of like study the topic of Tawheed through the Quran. This is called thematic tafsir. That's one way of doing thematic tafsir. And there's another way of doing it as well, which is whereby you're not making tafsir of the Quran on an ayah by ayah basis. Rather, you're going through the Quran by looking at the topics that have been mentioned within that surah. So you'll be like, for example, the first five, the ayah number 1 to 5 in this surah talks about this topic, and ayah 6 to 8 talks about that topic. And then you just mention all the different topics that have been, all the different themes that have been addressed within the surah. And you don't go deep into an ayah by ayah basis. So these are the 4 different formats of doing tafsir. So all of the books of tafsir, generally speaking, they will fit into one of these 4 buckets. Okay? طيب. All right. Going on to the third question. What are the most reliable and authentic books of tafsir? A very important question. Okay? But the first question has to be, before I answer that, how can we judge that? Is it something that is arbitrary, or do we have a way of judging that or not? Okay? So that's also a question. Inshallah, we'll clap. One moment. How can we judge if a tafsir is authentic? So before I mention some of the reliable, authentic books of tafsir, we need to know how we can judge. How do we know? How can we come to that conclusion? All right. Okay, so questions will clap, inshallah. Okay, so mashallah, I've got a good answer here. Okay, which is by implementing the foundations of tafsir. Yes. Okay. Very simple. Barakallahu feek. Whoever answered that question, barakallahu feek. That's exactly what it is. And this returns us back to last week's class. What did we mention last week? We talked about what makes a tafsir authentic. Not last week, I think the week before last. Last session, basically. The introduction to the foundations of tafsir. We mentioned what makes a tafsir authentic. Okay, so one of the things that we mentioned are what are the correct sources of tafsir. So a tafsir is authentic when it's based on the correct sources of tafsir, which is based on the Quran itself, the Sunnah, the sayings of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een, Atba' al-Tabi'een. And if there's authentic, the Israeliyat, up to an extent, not that we accept it to be true, but because of the Sahaba employ this, it is one of the sources of tafsir, but not a source that we can hold to be authentic in all cases. And the Arabic language as well, it's not 100% authentic because it depends on how the person understands it and the difference of opinion amongst the linguists. All right, but these 4, obviously, the Quran, the Sunnah, the Sahaba, and the Tabi'een, Atba' al-Tabi'een, these are the 4 authentic sources of tafsir. So as long as a tafsir is mainly based on those 4, then it's an authentic tafsir. If it opposes those 4, and what is mentioned in that tafsir is in opposition to those 4 sources, either is in opposition to the Quran or the Sunnah or the Salaf, who are the Sahaba and the 2 generations after them, then we can judge that that tafsir is inauthentic. Okay? So in short, those books that correctly employ the foundations of tafsir. طبعا the foundation of tafsir are more than that. It's not just about the sources. It's also about how to understand the sources. And there's a lot of different rules that apply to usul al-tafsir. So as long as a book correctly employs the foundations of tafsir, then we can judge that that tafsir book is authentic, inshallah. طيب. So in other words, books whose sources are Quran, Sunnah, upon understanding of the Salaf. And this disqualifies automatically books that either rely on weak narrations, books that rely on baseless stories, or books that rely on opinions. All these are automatically disqualified. And this automatically narrows down the selections of books that you should even consider. You know, out of the thousands of books of tafsir, it really narrows it down to maybe a handful or maybe 100, or Allah knows best what the number is. Yes, but the authentic books of tafsir, they are few compared to the books of tafsir out there. However, that doesn't mean that those books that are not 100% authentic or that aren't generally in line with the foundations of tafsir, it doesn't mean they're completely useless and they're thrown away and we never return back to them. No. They can be very useful resources, but only for students of knowledge that can sift through the authentic from the inauthentic. So you'll find a lot of gems, a lot of benefits in those books, even though they're not 100% authentic. But you need to have the ability to be able, or you need to have the ability to sift through the authentic and the inauthentic and know what's correct from what's incorrect. And this is only something that a student of knowledge can achieve. طيب. So a question then on WooClub. Can you name some authentic books of tafsir? All right. Can you name some authentic books of tafsir? So we have Ibn Kathir. We have Sa'di. We have translations of the Quran. So I'm going to post them here. You just vote on them. Inshallah, tell us which you think. No, I'm sorry, I don't know any. Al-Jalalain, one person mentioned. Tafsir al-Tabari, Ibn Kathir al-Sa'di. Okay, mashallah. Okay, now, translations of the Quran, that's not the right answer. Why? Because translations of the Quran are many. Some are authentic, some are not. So that's not the right answer. But if you were going to mention a translation from the translations of the Quran, which obviously is considered a book of tafsir because a translation of the meanings of the Quran, then one such a book would be the book or the meanings of the book written by Muhammad Muhsin Khan and Taqiyuddin al-Hilali. Okay, rahimahumullah. Tafsir al-Sa'di, authentic. Tafsir ibn Kathir, authentic. Tafsir al-Tabari, definitely authentic. And then we have Tafsir al-Jalalain. Tafsir al-Jalalain, no. It's authentic to a certain extent. However, there are some Aqeedah mistakes in that book. And that's why the scholars, they mentioned that only a student of knowledge should actually read that book, or you should read it or study it under a scholar. Because of some places whereby the authors, actually, two authors, Jalaluddin al-Mahalli and Jalaluddin al-Suyuti, those two authors have written that book, authored that tafsir. But both of them were affected by the Aqeedah of Asha'ira. So sometimes they will explain away or make ta'wil of the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's something to be aware of. Okay. Barakallahu feekum. Going back to the notes. Okay. Another question then, which is also important. Okay, so yeah, let's list some of the authentic books of tafsir. These are just some of them. They're not all of them. Right? Just an example. There are many other books as well that are authentic books of tafsir, but these are some. So we have Tafsir al-Tabari, also known as Jami'ul Bayan an Ta'wil Ay al-Quran, written by Abu Ja'far Muhammad ibn Jarir al-Tabari, who died in the year 310 after Hijrah. This book is by far the greatest work of tafsir. And the scholars, they call Imam al-Tabari, they call him Imam al-Mufassirin, the Imam of the Mufassirun, or those that do tafsir. Right? Obviously, that doesn't include the Sahaba and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but what they mean is, from those scholars that have written on tafsir, Imam Muhammad ibn Jarir al-Tabari, he's their Imam. He's at the forefront. And you'll find that all of the books of tafsir that come after him, they've benefited from this book. An immense, amazing piece of work. And obviously, the reason why scholars hold it in that high regard is because he's someone who's lived at a very early stage of Islam, and he's actually, he was the closest to the Salaf. And that's why his book is full of narrations from the Salaf. So basically, he mentions everything that he brings in his book has got a chain of narration. Chain of narration going back to either a Sahabi or a Tabi or the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Right? So he brings all those chains of narration. طبعا not all of the chains of narrations are authentic. However, the scholars, they mention that من أسند فقد برئت ذمته, that whoever mentions the chain of narration, then he's not held accountable, even if the narration is weak, because he's given us the chain of narration so that we can know, we can study and know if it's authentic or not. Okay, so not everything that he mentions from the narrations are authentic. However, it's a very it's one of the number one sources in tafsir, and the scholars, they hold it in a very high regard. However, it's not to be read except by a student of knowledge, obviously. Student of knowledge who can look at the chains of narration, and generally speaking is a very high level book anyway, not easy to understand. And it goes into khilaf, it talks about qira'at, it talks about everything you can think of. طبعا, if we sit here today, try to talk about this tafsir and its benefits and its high status, that would take up all of the lecture. So we'll suffice with that, inshallah. And it's unfortunate that some people that claim to be doing tafsir would belittle such an imam and call him just an historian. Allahul Musta'an. And that just shows you that that individual doesn't know tafsir, and he doesn't know the sources of tafsir. Yes. That has caused him to say this about someone who's regarded by all of the mufassirun. Anyone that has got any sort of background in tafsir, even those that might disagree with At-Tabari or might not even be upon the same aqeedah, all of them have respect for this great imam, and they all agree that he is the number one reference point when it comes to tafsir. Yeah, his book basically, and that no one can really do a proper tafsir without returning back to his book. Then we have Tafsir ibn Kathir. Tafsir ibn Kathir, Tafsir al-Quran al-Azim, an amazing book written by Imad al-Din Abu al-Fida, Ismail ibn Kathir al-Qurashi, and most of you are aware of this book. This book is an amazing book. It's not too long, and also he's got a unique way of connecting the ayat to ahadith. So that's one thing that really sets him apart. He's really focused a lot on Tafsir al-Quran bis-Sunnah. And he also does a lot of Tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran as well. Okay, and he returns to Ibn Jarir. You'll find in Tafsir ibn Kathir a lot of time he says قال Abu Ja'far. If he says قال Abu Ja'far, he means Imam Ibn Jarir al-Tabari, one of his main sources. Then we have Tafsir al-Baghawi, likewise a very short tafsir but very powerful and authentic. Ma'alim al-Tanzil, written by Abu Muhammad al-Husayn ibn Mas'ud ibn Muhammad al-Baghawi, died in the year 510. Okay, Ibn Kathir died in the year 774, so Baghawi was before him. I was going to put this actually in chronological order, so I don't know what happened here. So let's put Tabari before Ibn Kathir. Okay, then we have Tafsir of Imam al-Sa'di rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in the year 1390, so quite recently. Okay, Taysir al-Karim al-Rahman fi Tafsir Kalam al-Mannan. And this book, really what sets it apart is it's really, really suitable for beginners. Allahumma barik. And it's a book that really focuses a lot on what we would call tarbiyah, or we call cultivating the believer, cultivating the Muslim upon good akhlaq and cultivating him upon the correct aqeedah. It's kind of like a book that, you know, is a very transformational, and it's not really like an academic book. It's really a book that, you know, that transforms you, right? And a lot of benefits in this book. Then we have Tafsir of Ibn Uthaymin rahimahullah. He hasn't made Tafsir of the whole of the Quran, Tafsir al-Quran al-Karim. Unfortunately, he died before he could complete it. And all of you know Shaykh Ibn Uthaymin rahimahullah ta'ala. But his Tafsir really stands apart as well, the way he does i'rab in a very easy way. So those of you that have done a bit of nahu here and there, learned some nahu, such as Ajrumi or these kind of books, I advise you to read the Tafsir of Ibn Kathir of Shaykh Ibn Uthaymin, because he poses a lot of questions to the students when it comes to i'rab. So it's kind of like a practical implementation of those things that you learn in Arabic grammar. And طبعا he is from the students, one of the main students of Imam al-Sa'di. So all of the good things about Tafsir al-Sa'di, you'll find them as well in Ibn Uthaymin, inshallah. Tafsir Ibn Uthaymin. These are some of the books, authentic books of Tafsir. But the question then remains, which books are most suitable for beginners. So a book of tafsir, just being authentic is not good enough for a beginner. Yes, because the beginner, even though the book is authentic, it might not be suitable for him. It might be above his head. So which tafsir books are more suitable for beginners, right? So what do you think we should consider? Okay, so when we say, well, yeah, what makes a book of tafsir suitable for beginners? Let me pose that as a question. What makes a book of tafsir suitable for beginners? What do you think? Yani, what boxes does it need to tick? All right, so that's a question on WooClap. Okay, so shall I answer that question on WooClap? So, not complex, easy to understand. Okay, I wouldn't say suitable for a particularly English speaker, no matter what language that person speaks, right? What do we need to look at? A general and simple, simplicity, does not go into too much detail, keeps it simple, okay? Easy language, not too many technical terms, not going into great detail. Any book that's authentic, and tafsir ijmali, okay? It introduced Islam to the reader in the same way that Muhammad introduced Islam. MashaAllah, I like that, that's a good point. Allahumma barik. Clearly relays meanings of verse, usually concise, thematic, okay? Books that have no opinions in it. MashaAllah. A tafsir that brings up the important points, or main points, okay? Does not have mistakes in Aqeedah. It's an important point as well. Okay, mashallah. I've got some great answers here. Allahumma barik. Okay. Now, these are the points that I could come up with, and I can see, mashallah, some of you came up with some very good points as well. Allahumma barik. Okay. So we have books that, number one, are written in a language that's easy to understand. Okay. And a lot of you mentioned that as well. It's a book that should focus on the most fundamental aspects of the deen. So the deen is vast, and the Quran talks about everything, right? But as a beginner, you know, what's most relevant to you are those fundamental aspects of the deen related to Aqeedah and the likes. Yes. Likewise, that it doesn't go into any analytical detailed tafsir, right? On a word by word basis, and what's the meaning of this word linguistically and technically, and what's the root of this word, and these sort of things. No, that's not suitable for beginners. Likewise, it shouldn't go into other unrelated sciences. This is important because we mentioned now the books of tafsir don't just contain tafsir, they contain a lot of other sciences as well, generally speaking. And that's why the first lecture that we did, we talked about how to know if something is tafsir or not. So it should only be tafsir. It shouldn't include other unrelated sciences that do not aid or contribute to clarifying the meaning of the words of Allah. And likewise, it shouldn't go into khilaf. It shouldn't go into differences of opinion. Yes, one scholar said this, another scholar said this. What's the strongest opinion? This opinion is weak. So this kind of like comparative tafsir is not suitable to a beginner. Barakallahu feekum. Okay, this and some of the amazing points as well that some of you made, these are the sort of things we need to look out for. Okay, so based on that, can you name some tafsir books that are suitable for beginners? Okay, that's a question on WooClap. Can you name some tafsir books that are suitable for beginners? Okay, we have someone said Sa'di. Absolutely. Barakallahu feek. Someone said Tafsir al-Muyassar. Naam. Barakallahu feekum. Someone said Ibn Kathir, and someone also mentioned Ibn Uthaymin. Okay. Tayyib. What else? Okay, now these answers, generally speaking, they're all good. Okay. Even though Baghawi, even though beginners come in different shapes and sizes, to be honest, right? But some of the books that are suitable are At-Tafsir al-Muyassar, which is a book written by a group of scholars in Medina. Yes, it's a very beautiful, very concise and easy tafsir. And what makes even more amazing is that there's an English translation of it out there, inshallah, which I'll share before next lesson, right? Will probably be one of the resources that you should return back to before we do our tafsir class. Another tafsir as well is the tafsir al-mukhtasar, which is very similar to a tafsir al-muyassar, but just written by another group of scholars, right? Then we have tafsir al-Sa'di. Definitely one of the main books that the scholars they advise with. Yani, from the contemporary scholars, it's very rare that you will find anyone not advising a beginner with this book, right? Tafsir al-Sa'di. Then Tafsir al-Baghawi as well is good for beginners. Again, maybe higher level beginners, right? And then Tafsir ibn Kathir, maybe not the Tafsir itself, but the abridged versions of it. So there's a lot of mukhtasarat. I mean, I don't think there's another book on the planet that has so many summaries or mukhtasarat or abridgments as Tafsir ibn Kathir, right? So many people had a go at it. Which just shows you the high status of this book, right? So one of the mukhtasarat, such as the one by Sheikh Ahmed Shakir, for example, or by I think Mubarak Furi, if I'm not mistaken, also has one in which one of the mukhtasarat of Ibn Kathir in which he was in charge. So it's done by a group of people that are specified that are qualified in tafsir, but he was kind of like in charge of that group. طيب. Now we come on to an extremely important question. Okay, now we come to a very important question. Probably the most important question we're going to pose today, which is, shouldn't I, as a beginner, first study small books on Aqeedah before tafsir? Okay, I'll pose that question on WooClap once again. Shouldn't I, as a beginner, first study small books on Aqeedah before tafsir? Okay, so we have a variety of different answers. Think about it carefully. Shouldn't I, as a beginner, first study small books on Aqeedah before tafsir? Okay, so the majority of you said yes. Okay, study small books on Aqeedah first. Okay, which in essence, يعني, there is no definite answer on it, but I do want to grab your attention to number one, that is not necessarily. Okay, and this is not my opinion, right? It's opinion of some of the scholars, most prominently Sheikh Ibn Baz, rahimahullah ta'ala. And I'm going to show you what he advises a student of knowledge to begin with. And I think this is really where the difference lies. Student of knowledge or not, okay? But here, you'll find that Sheikh Ibn Baz, this is from his website, you'll find this fatwa over here, where he gives an advice to the beginner student of knowledge, right? What he should start with. So the Sheikh mentions here, rahimahullah ta'ala, يبدأ بالقرآن. He should start with the Quran. يجتهد في القرآن. ثم كتب العقيدة. So he says first the Quran and then the books of Aqeedah, like the book, Kitab al-Aqeedah al-Wasitiyya and so forth. Okay? Likewise here, another fatwa by Sheikh Ibn Baz. What does he say? ما الكتب التي ينصح بها طالب العلم المبتدئ. What are the books that a beginner student of knowledge is advised with? What does he say? He says أعظم كتاب, the greatest book. وأشرف كتاب, and the most honorable book. وأصدق كتاب, and the most truthful book that I can advise you with, or that I can advise كل طالب علم with, is العناية بالقرآن. Giving special attention to the Quran. والإقبال عليه, and turning towards it. And وهو كتاب العقيدة, and it is the book of Aqeedah. And it is the book of fiqh. And it is the book of ahkam. And it's the book of Islamic history. جامع لكل شيء. It gathers everything. Subhanallah. فأنصح كل طالب العلم, he says. I advise every student of knowledge that he gives special attention to the Quran. وأن يجتهد في حفظه والإكثار من تلاوته وتدبر معانيه, and he should increase in memorizing it and reciting it and pondering over its meanings. Okay? Until the end of the fatwa. So here Sheikh Ibn Baz, he mentions that you should start with the Quran and then the books of Aqeedah, right? And even though, like I said, it's not the only answer. Okay. Now, like I said, you know, there's different ways of looking at it. Some scholars, they say, start with the books of Aqeedah because you need it right away. صح? But, and then there's a good point in there. صح? But we need to pay attention to this, which is there's a benefit to this approach. There's a clear benefit to this approach. Learning the tafsir first and then the books of Aqeedah, especially for the general folk. And I'll tell you why. Number one, what does an Ami Muslim, you know, general folk, someone who doesn't understand the manhaj al-Salafi, right? He's an Ami Muslim. When you try to teach him Aqeedah through a contemporary book, yes, what does he think? All right, so I want you to think about that. Someone who's new to practicing maybe, or he's not maybe new to practicing, but he wants to learn tafsir. And then you say to him, come here, I'm going to teach you your creed and your Aqeedah through this book written by Fulan bin Fulan, by this and that scholar, a contemporary author. Okay? Could be a great scholar. He could be a great scholar. He could be an imam, right? But if you say this to an Ami, what is he going to think? Right? Now, if he doesn't know the author beforehand, if he hasn't heard of that scholar before, he might be skeptical. And rightly so, he should be skeptical, because that's what religion teaches us, that you don't take knowledge and you don't base your religion, yes, on someone else's opinion, right? Especially if you don't know the individual, right? So he's going to be skeptical, the general Ami, when you say to him, I'm going to teach you your creed, your Aqeedah by this, through this book, right? If it's a book written by a contemporary author. But the opposite. What happens if he's exposed to the correct Aqeedah through the Quran? If you say to him, come, I'm going to teach you the Quran, tafsir of the Quran. And you open the Quran and you come across an ayah about Tawheed. And then you open the books of tafsir and you bring the hadith that explains the ayah about the Tawheed. And you go through the Quran like this. Yes? And you expose him to the correct Aqeedah through the Quran. What happens? Huh? Number one, he'll be 100% convinced that this is the truth. He will have 0% doubt, and ultimately he will stay firmer upon the haqq. Why? Because he took it directly from its source. He took it directly from the Quran. There's no room for him to be skeptical and to think that I don't know this individual. You don't need to convince him and kind of like, if you like, tell him about this scholar who wrote that book and spend like half an hour talking about the scholar and his high status and what other scholars said about him and how reliable he is. You don't need to do all of that, right? You gave him the correct Aqeedah from its source, and this will guarantee that he's more firm upon the haqq. Yes? And you'll find sometimes truth has to be said. Some people, they're guided to Salafiyah, they're guided to the true Aqeedah, and they learn Aqeedah through some books, yes? But then somehow, maybe, they hear bad things about the author through family members, through their community, and before you know it, they've left Da'wah to Salafiyah. Why? Because now they don't trust the author of that book anymore. Okay, so now they go and listen to other people. That wouldn't have been the case if Aqeedah was introduced to him through the Quran. Okay, so if we contemplate on this point, right, what do we find? We find that the most powerful tactic that the people of misguidance use are two things. Number one, character assassination. They do this a lot, right? So they put you off from that person who calls to the truth. Yes, by character assassinating him. So they talk ill about Muhammad Abdul Wahhab, they talk bad about Sheikh Ibn Baz, Ibn Uthaymin, Albani, whatever. That's the number one tactic that they use. Number one, you know, let's character assassinate those people that call to the truth so that, you know, people don't read their books. That's one tactic that they use. Another tactic that they use is they capitalize on the appeal of the Quran or the love that the general Muslim has for the Quran. So they go out and they teach tafsir. They say, hey, come, let me teach you the Quran. I'm going to teach you tafsir. And then through the tafsir, he introduces all of his misguided thoughts and all of his innovations. Okay? Don't we agree that this really is one of the most powerful tactics that I have witnessed that the people of misguidance they use? Yes, that's really what they do. Okay? So how can we as Salafis be oblivious to this? Honestly, we have to ask ourselves, right? And we see that what kind of effect it has. Yes? So what we end up doing is we end up fighting fire with fire. So they character assassinate. So what do? We start, you know, just spending a lot of time on praising the scholar and you know, nothing wrong with it. Of course, we should praise our scholars and our A'imma. We should defend their honor. Yes? But we shouldn't present the truth, yes, through a scholar. We should present the truth through the Quran and the Sunnah. And then we should quote the scholar's kalam. So again, the way we should do it is, we should, when we call an Ammi and we want to teach him the correct Aqeedah, we should say to him, Allah said, the Prophet said, and this explanation of the scholars. Okay, so we connect him to the Quran and the Sunnah, not the other way around. Not that we say Sheikh Fulan said that Allah said. No, we shouldn't do this, which is what happens, unfortunately, right? So we constantly say that we call to the Quran and Sunnah. Yes, but every time we want to make a point, we quote a scholar. How come? Honestly, this is reality. Yes, especially when we talk to the awam. We talk to the awam, and when we want to make a point, we say, قال الشيخ فلان, قال العالم الفلاني, قال الإمام فلان. Yes, instead of saying Allah said, the Prophet said, and to understand this ayah, Ibn Kathir said, the scholar said. There's nothing wrong with that. Yes, but for us to make our points and back up our points with the speech of the scholars and quote the scholars, when it comes to an Ammi, this is very destructive and this puts him off. And you have to know that this general person who doesn't know Da'wah to Salafiyya initially, Aslan, he's already got a lot of things that he heard about Salafis. One of the things I'll guarantee you that he has heard about them is that these Salafis, they blind follow such and such. He must have heard this from people in his community. Now, when he comes to you to give you a chance and to listen to what you've got, if all he hears, Fulan and Fulan said, the first thing he's going to think is, Wallahi, the people, they told the truth. I came to their mosque and all I heard is Sheikh Fulan, Sheikh Fulan, Sheikh Fulan. Okay, I heard Sheikh Fulan said and then an ayah. Instead, I was expecting to hear Allah said, the Prophet said. These Salafis, they claim that they're upon the Quran and the Sunnah, but they only quote the Quran and the Sunnah through a scholar. Okay, this is something that's important, dear brothers and sisters. Very important point. So when we teach the Aqeedah through the Quran, this is one of the benefits. This is one of the benefits. And, I'm going to make a statement now, right? Which is that if you study the Quran correctly, according to the Sunnah and the understanding of the Salaf, it will suffice you from all of the books of Aqeedah. It will suffice you from all of the books of the Aqeedah. Whereas all of the books of the Aqeedah on the face of the earth, they won't suffice you from the Quran. Do I need to prove this? Do I have to prove that? I know it sounds like a bold statement. Do I have to prove that? I don't even need to prove that. Why? Because the companions, the Salaf, the Sahaba, all those A'imma that lived before these books of Aqeedah were even authored, yes? Were they missing something? La wallah, they weren't missing something. They were upon the correct Aqeedah, upon the correct manhaj, everything was fine for them. Right? Okay? Now, I want you to pay attention. This is not to belittle the books of Aqeedah. No. The books of Aqeedah, they're very important and they serve a very important purpose. Yes? Which is that they make the Aqeedah much more accessible to the general folk. Yes, because the Quran is a big book. It talks about a lot of different things. Yes, the books of Aqeedah, they make it much more accessible. So the issue is not with the books of Aqeedah. The problem is when a Salafi only studies the books of Aqeedah and neglects the Quran. Here is the problem. So he will take 2, 3, 4, 5 books on Aqeedah and he'll think, now, khalas, I know the Aqeedah. He doesn't ever go on and advance onto taking the tafsir of the Quran. And that's why if we look at the stage, how many books of tafsir or how many series of tafsir, completed series of tafsirs have been taught by people upon Salafiyya? Not many. There's a massive shortage when it comes to tafsir and when it comes to focusing on the Quran. Okay? So the Quran, it encompasses so much more than what's found in the books of Aqeedah, especially the small mutun or the small books of Aqeedah. Yes? There's so much more in the Quran. Okay? So in essence, the mutun of Aqeedah or those books of Aqeedah, they are short summary of the Quran when it comes to the authentic creed. That's what they are. So the scholars, they went to the Quran, they looked at the most fundamental topics, they brought it together and they made a small summary, which is more suitable for people that are not students of knowledge, right? And that way they can learn the Aqeedah quickly without having to wait to finish the whole Quran. So this is an important purpose served by the books of Aqeedah. But the problem, again, like we said, is when people then don't realize this, they think that it's all in the books of Aqeedah, that's it. You take 2, 3 books on Aqeedah, khalas. Now you know the Aqeedah al-Sunnah wal-Jama'ah, you don't need to go to the tafsir of the Quran. All right? So, but the question is, should you start with the summary first or go to the actual source? Now that depends. If you have time to go to the actual source, or you have the resources to read the actual source, then do that first. And then come to the summary to memorize it. Okay, so the scholars, and this is something that people don't realize, The books of Aqeedah have mainly been written for people to memorize. So that, okay, I've learned the tafsir, I know the correct Aqeedah, but for me to remember it. Yes, so that if I'm approached by a person of innovation and I want to advise him, yes, I'm going to quote that passage from this Kitab of Aqeedah, and you'll find that the books of Aqeedah aslan, for the most part, is just Quran and Sunnah anyway. It's not like, there's not opinions. Some books they are written in the scholar's word, but for the most part, if we look at Kitab al-Tawheed, Aqeedah Wasitiyya, Usul al-Thalatha, Qawaid al-Arba', these books, they're just ayat and ahadith for the most part. So scholars, they wrote it, they kind of like extracted these ayat from the Quran, they extracted the ahadith that are related to Aqeedah for you to memorize it. Not for you to just stick to it and not go on to the Quran. Yes. So it depends. Sometimes you start with the summary if it necessitates. But even if you start with the summary, you have to eventually get to the source. You have to eventually get to the source. You can't be pleased with just the summary. You've just read a few books on Aqeedah, that's it, you're pleased with it. You never go on to learn the tafsir of the Quran. Okay? So to conclude, there's a clear and apparent weakness amongst us Salafiyun, especially in the West when it comes to the Quran. Okay? And I wanted to point this out. Yes? If you are going to start with the small books on Aqeedah, there's no problem. Do that. It's very good. Yes? But it does not suffice you from learning the tafsir. This book that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed to you, Allah said, هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ كِتَابٌ أَنزَلْنَاهُ مُبَارَكٌ. This is a book that we have revealed, which is blessed. لِيَدَّبَّرُوا آيَاتِهِ وَلِيَتَذَكَّرُوا الْأَلْبَابِ. Allah has revealed the Quran for you to contemplate over, to ponder over, to act upon. A book of guidance. هُدًى وَبُشْرَى لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ is a guidance and a glad tidings for the believers. Okay? This book is the book of guidance. Okay? How can you go years upon years, yes, without doing the tafsir from cover to cover because you have taken some books on Aqeedah and some books on fiqh? لا والله ما ينبغي. So I definitely understand where Shaykh Ibn Baz is coming from when he says start with the tafsir and then to the books of Aqeedah. Because wallah, if you do the tafsir, if you do correct tafsir, yes, alhamdulillah, you would have covered all of the Aqeedah. I guarantee you. And inshallah ta'ala, we will do this in our tafsir classes, inshallah. I guarantee you, inshallah, if we take the tafsir from cover to cover, we will have covered everything mentioned in these books of Aqeedah that people study. Okay? Albeit maybe in different places, in different contexts. Right? But all the ayat in Kitab al-Tawheed, we'll come across them. And when we come across them, we'll also mention the hadith that relate to the ayat. All of the ayat mentioned Usul al-Thalatha, we're going to come across them. When we come across them, we'll also mention the points mentioned by Imam Muhammad Abdul Wahhab or the hadith that come with those ayat. Same thing with Qawaid al-Arba'. Any book that you can think of, Al-Aqeedah al-Wasitiyya. Yes? The first half of the book is ayat from the Quran. The second half is a hadith from the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam that explain those ayat. It's just a book of tafsir, but it's kind of like summarized. It's a book of tafsir just on the Aqeedah. Okay? The closest I could call it is tafsir mawdu'i. It's kind of like a thematic tafsir, really, if you look at these books of Aqeedah. Right? So inshallah ta'ala, when we do the tafsir, if we do the tafsir, inshallah, and this is our objective, bi'idhnillah al-kareem, we ask Allah to give us tawfiq in that regard, is that, and I will use these books of Aqeedah as one of the resources for preparing these classes. Yes? So inshallah, the target or the goal is that if we finish the Quran from cover to cover, you would have also have taken everything mentioned in the books of Aqeedah or the main books of Aqeedah. Inshallah ta'ala. That is one of the objectives bi'idhnillah al-kareem. And then after that, when we're done, we can go over the books of Aqeedah as a summary and we can memorize them together, study them together to be sure that what we've learned from the Quran when it comes to Aqeedah, that we don't forget it by utilizing these books of Aqeedah for the reason for which they were written, which is as a summary of the Aqeedah. Okay? Barakallahu feekum. And another benefit, the last one, which is that these books of Aqeedah, they bring you the ayat from the Quran. Yes? But for every ayat that they bring, maybe there's 4, 5, 6 ayat that are also related to it that they haven't brought for the sake of brevity, for the sake of keeping it as a summary. Okay? But when you go through the Quran, you're gonna come across so many different ayat that talk about Tawheed, that talk about these sort of things, that itself has a major impact on the person that learns tafsir. So you're not just going to learn the most fundamental things in the Quran, you're also going to know what things are most fundamental based on how many times they're repeated in the Quran. Okay, so if you do the Quran from cover to cover, you will truly come to understand the high states of Tawheed. You'll truly come to realize that the Quran is a book of Tawheed. Okay, we don't realize that now. Why? Because we haven't read the Quran from cover to cover. We don't know how much importance Allah has placed on Tawheed. But if you take the tafsir, you will know. And this is really the shortcoming when it comes to the journey. This is what we need to communicate to the people. Yes, when we call them to Salafiyah. So I think one of the best ways to teach Salafiyah, one of the best ways to teach the correct Aqeedah is by teaching authentic tafsir. طيب. In conclusion, this is an important question. How can books on one subject vary to such an extent? So based on what we did today so far, you would have noticed that even though we're talking about tafsir, the books of tafsir come in so many different forms, shapes, and sizes, and what have you. How is that possible? Okay, so that's a question on Book Lab. So you have one book, right, which is the tafsir, the Quran of the Quran. Yes, you have books of tafsir which explain the meanings of the Quran. So that's the question of Book Lab. How can books on one subject vary to such an extent? Okay, some go more in depth. Okay, the diversity in topics being covered. Some go into deeper than others because they cover different categories of tafsir. Author not having correct madhab or aqeedah. Scholars adopting different methodologies. Okay, that's a very good point. Scholars adopting different methodologies. Now, each book might approach tafsir through a different angle. For example, sunnah, grammar, tafsir of Quran. Naam. Okay. The author may mention something similar on the book because different depth. Okay. All right. Okay, all these answers are generally speaking correct. Okay, but it all returns back to one thing. All of these answers, they return back to one thing. All right, which is because the Quran is the basis of all sciences. That's why. So the Quran itself, yes, it's the basis of all sciences. The Quran itself talks about so many different things. So when you have a person writing tafsir, you know, he's got such so many options available to him. So any topic one would like to write on, he can choose to make the Quran a base, right? Likewise, any inclination that someone has will have an effect on his tafsir, all right? So that's why we have books of tafsir that are, in essence, closer to fiqh books or nahu books or history books than they are to tafsir. So even though the book's called Book of Tafsir, you open it, it's actually a book. It's kind of like a fiqh book, really. Okay, because that's the inclination the author had, and the Quran has got enough ayat that he can use. Same thing with Nahu, same thing with history. Yes, so in essence, and this is the benefit of today's lecture, it's about being aware of these things. Yes, and then based on the awareness, you can carefully choose the books that align with your goals and objectives. This is the important thing. Yes, because there is such a wide variety of books of tafsir. Yes, you can't really just grab the closest book of tafsir, the closest one to you, and read it. No, because you're going to have a specific goal. You're going to have a specific objective. So if you don't do this, if you don't carefully choose the book based on your objectives and goals, then you might just grab any book. Yes, and then wonder why you haven't reached your objective at the end. You might be like, oh, wait a minute, what's happening? Yes. So for example, maybe you want to learn tafsir in order to learn the correct aqeedah. Yes. But if you pick up a tafsir book that focuses on grammar or the linguistic beauty of the Quran, you will quickly be put off. You know, very quickly you're going to be bored. Very quickly you're going to feel like that you're not learning aqeedah. Okay. And it's not something wrong with that book itself, because the author wrote that book for a specific objective, specific goal. And he's probably mentioned that in the introduction. I'm writing this book for this objective. The problem is with the fact that because you can't find what you're looking for, and the reason why you can't find what you're looking for is because you're looking in the wrong place. Okay, you want to learn aqeedah through tafsir, then grab those books. That number one, upon the correct aqeedah first and foremost, and that focus on aqeedah. Okay, then you'll feel at home. Then you'll feel that by the time when you finish the book from end to end, you'll feel that you've reached your objective. Okay, so this is really important. And this also brings us to the dangers of what I'd like to call da'watainment. Okay, all right, da'watainment. What's da'watainment? Da'watainment is basically people who are more focused on the wow factor than actually transforming the lives of their audience. So there's a lot of people out there, I call them da'watainers. They think they're involved in da'wah, but in reality, they're just there to entertain their audience for whatever ulterior motive that they may have. Yes, increasing their YouTube subscribers, their likes, their followers. Maybe they charge money for it, and a lot of them do. So they have to keep you engaged. They have to keep you happy. They have to keep you, if you like, in the state of wow. Yes. So they don't really, their objective is not to change your life or transform your life or focus on the things that will benefit you in the hereafter. They just want to keep your attention. They just want to have that wow factor. They just want to make their videos viral. Yes. So you have to be careful when it comes to da'watainment. Wallah, is one of the greatest calamities of this ummah in this day and age. When it comes to YouTube and Instagram and these sort of things, those are not the places you seek knowledge. Those are places for being da'watained, right? And for indeed, talking about objectives, the first objective of learning tafsir has to be for you to act upon it. That has to be the number one objective that Allah has mentioned in the Quran. Okay, Allah has mentioned this in the Quran. أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ. Is for you to contemplate on it and for you to act upon it. Okay, that has to be number one objective. Okay, but how do you act upon? Yes, and I'm going to give an example here. How are you going to act upon the so-called palindrome miracle in the Quran and the likes? Yes, these people that always seem to be talking about miracles of the Quran. Yes, so one example to give is what they call the palindrome miracle of the Quran. So he says to you, وَرَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ, and then he if you like, conveniently says ignore the wow, yes, so that he can prove his point. And then he wants to say to you, if you look at this رَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ, if you read it from right to left, رَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ, you can also read it from left to right and still the same word. Okay, so رَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ, and if you start from left to right, رَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ. Okay, this they call a palindrome, which is something known in languages. There's nothing miraculous about it. Okay, what's similar to it in the English language is race car. Yes, race car. So race car, if you read it forward or you read it backwards, it's still the same thing. This is not a miracle. Okay, and he took this from it's been mentioned by some of the balaghiyun, yes, people that talk about the eloquent nature of the Quran, and they wrote those books, but those books, they didn't write it for beginners in knowledge. They didn't write it for you to make YouTube videos on and literally, in essence, busy the people away from Aqeedah, busy the people away from the important fundamental topics of the Quran with these sort of things. Okay, this is one example. The examples are many. Everything they come across that is slightly interesting, they call it miracle of the Quran. La ya akhi. Subhanallah. So you need to be aware of this. How are you going to act upon this? Billah alik. رَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ. If you read it forwards and backwards, it's the same. How is this going to make you a better Muslim? How is that going to draw you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Tell me. It doesn't. Okay? So that's why it's important to know what tafsir is in reality. This is not tafsir, number one. Okay? And also, it's very important to know what type or level of tafsir you are in need of. Okay? So not everything, even if it's authentic, even if it is tafsir, it is authentic, it doesn't mean it's relevant to you. It's not relevant to you becoming a better Muslim. And that's why, subhanAllah, we've been tried and tested with these kind of individuals in this day and age. Okay, people that just talk more, they talk a lot. I mean, they churn out content 24/7, right? They even got streaming services, right, to keep you busy 24/7. Their own Netflix, if you like. Yes, but if you dig through it, it's mainly noise and no signal, right? And I advise you to read a book called بيان فضل علم السلف على علم الخلف, written by Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali, an amazing book that talks about the knowledge of the Salaf, what it was in reality, and the knowledge of those that came after them, right? And here we have one extract here, one quote here that I'll read to you, which is that he said, السلف أقل الناس كلاما وتوسعا في العلوم. That the Salaf, those before us, they were the least of people when it comes to speech. And they were the least to go deep into different sciences, right? So you'll find that all this depth when it comes to balagha and going into detail and mentioning these kind of things, it happened after the Salaf. Yes, the Salaf, they were very, very small speech, yes, and they wouldn't go into that much detail. However, what does he say? لكن علمهم علم نافع في قلوبهم. But their knowledge is a knowledge which benefits them in their hearts. It has an effect on their hearts. It increases them in iman. Yes? ويعبرون بألسنتهم عن القدر المحتاج إليه من ذلك. And then they express on their tongue, yes, from that knowledge that they have, which is fundamental, in whatever is needed. You know, they only express what is needed with their tongues. They don't go into details just to flex their muscles, if you like, or just to wow their audience. No, the Salaf didn't have this. Okay, and he also mentions وهذا هو الفقه والعلم, and this is what fiqh is. This is what ilm al-nafi' is. This is what beneficial knowledge is. فأفضل العلوم في تفسير القرآن ومعاني الحديث والكلام في الحلال والحرام. That the most beneficial of sciences is that which is related to the explanation of the meanings of the Quran, okay, what Allah meant, and the meanings of the hadith, and talking about what's halal and what is haram. Okay, from that which is ما كان مأثورا عن الصحابة والتابعين وتابعيهم, from that which has been narrated from the Sahaba and the Tabi'un and those that came after the Tabi'un. Then he mentioned إلى أن ينتهي إلى أئمة الإسلام والمشهورين المقتدى بهم, until you come to the great illuminous scholars and imams of our time. This is what you find. Their speech, you might find it repetitive, but yeah, that's what it is. Okay, that's what Allah and His Messenger came with. And as the time goes on, it seems like knowledge only increases, but that's not the reality. It's not knowledge that is increasing. It's just the knowledge, the true knowledge is being diluted by all of these, some of it nonsense in reality. Right. Now, to summarize all of this, yes, and this is really the, if you like, what the conclusion that we come to after these 3 sessions that we've had. Yes, I can conclude everything that we've said with this one image, right? Okay, this is in reality what the past 3 lectures were about. Okay, so in the first lecture we established what we call the Quranic Sciences. Very vast, a lot of different information, yes. But then in the first lecture, we try to clarify that not everything that is related to the Quran is part of tafsir. Okay, number 1. Okay, so tafsir, okay, tafsir, all of tafsir is part of Quranic Sciences, but not everything in Quranic Sciences is part of tafsir. That's number 1. Number 2, and this is what we had in the second lecture, we established something else, which is that not all tafsir, yes, if it is tafsir, if it does relate to clarifying the meanings of the Quran, is authentic. Okay, so some of it is authentic and some of it is not. So you need to be aware of this. Okay, and then today we came to the conclusion on the last point, the last piece in the puzzle today was that not all of the tafsir that is authentic is relevant to you. Okay, especially as a beginner. Okay, so in essence, what is it that we're looking for? And inshallah, hopefully what our tafsir course is going to be based on is going to be based on giving you relevant, authentic tafsir, those 3 things. So it needs to be relevant to you in a sense that it can change your life. It's something that's actionable. It's something that you can benefit from. It's something that can transform you as a Muslim. It can make you a better Muslim. Number 2, it has to be authentic. And number 3, it has to actually be tafsir and not other Quranic sciences. It needs to clarify the meanings of the Quran. So that inshallah ta'ala, at the end of the course and at the end, when we're done with the tafsir, yes, you will have something that you can act upon, something that can change your life, something that you can rely upon, yes, and you will have understood the meanings of the speech of your Lord, yes, correctly. That is inshallah the purpose of the upcoming tafsir course. So inshallah ta'ala, next lecture, we're gonna introduce the tafsir course, inshallah ta'ala, by talking about the course objectives, number 1, which I've actually mentioned most of it today. We're gonna also do an exam on the introductory lessons that we've done so far. So I'm gonna release an exam on it, and inshallah ta'ala, don't worry, I'm going to release all of my notes. I know I'm a bit late. I've really been busy this week with some of the brothers and sisters that wanted to volunteer and onboarding them and stuff. But inshallah ta'ala, I'm going to release all of the notes beforehand, and we're going to do an exam so that I want to be sure that everything we took so far is actually registered. That's important. Why? For many things, for many reasons. Yes, regardless if you continue with this tafsir class, you continue studying with me or not, or you go on to study from someone else. These are tools that you have to have. All right. And also, I want you to implement what you've learned when it comes to the classes that we do. I want you to point it out to me. Ustad, you're getting sidetracked. Ustad, what's the proof for this? You mentioned this. How do we know it's authentic? What is the proof? Ustad, you've mentioned this, but it's not actually tafsir. I want you to challenge me. Wallah, I do. I want you to challenge me. Okay? It's good for me. I get to rectify myself. And also, it's good in a sense that, you're going to develop the skill. Because these, in essence, they're all skills that you need to develop. Likewise, I'm going to describe how the assignments are going to be and how they're going to be assigned. We'll talk about the lecture format. And we'll also give a few guidelines on how to make the most of the course. And finally, we're actually going to start with the tafsir. I'm not going to delay it another second. We will do tafsir, inshallah, of the isti'adah, which is a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, and the basmala, bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And then, inshallah, the lecture after that, we can start with Surah Al-Fatiha. Okay? So this, inshallah, we're going to do next lecture. Bidnillah al-Kareem. Okay, no problem, inshallah. I'll share the notes anyway, so you have access to it, inshallah. I'll share the notes anyway, so that you have access to it. I'm looking very much forward to our next class next week, where we'll actually start the tafsir, inshallah ta'ala. And I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He makes this endeavor a beneficial one and one that is full of barakah and blessings for me and for you. Allahumma allimna ma yanfa'una wa anfa'na bima 'allamtana wa zidna ilma. Oh Allah, teach us that which will benefit us, and benefit us by way of that which you have taught us. وزدنا علما, and oh Allah, increase us in knowledge. Allahumma inna nas'aluka ilman nafi'an. Oh Allah, we ask you for beneficial knowledge. وعملا صالحا, and righteous deeds. ورزقا طيبا, and we ask you for a provision that is good. هذا والله أعلم وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد. بارك الله فيكم.